Dear students, welcome back to this new lesson on research methodology. Today we will look at two different methods of research used by sociologists, namely case study and longitudinal study. You are reminded that we are looking at research methodology for those studying O-Level Sociology 2251. For this lesson, you may refer to Blundell GCSE Sociology coursework, pages 29 and 30. What is a case study? A case study, as the name suggests, is simply a study of a specific group, an individual person, a particular event, or a single example of something. You will understand this better with a few examples. Let me therefore give you a few examples of case studies. Here are two examples. Goldthorpe and Lockwood study of affluent workers in Luton Town in 1968. Affluent means a group of people who are enjoying a better lifestyle and working in a well-paid sector at that time. They looked at the newly affluent group of working class people who adopted a middle-class lifestyle owing to new conditions of work and enjoying a privatized lifestyle as they had migrated to Luton. Privatized means on their own with few friends and relatives or acquaintances in a new place. Another example is that of a participant observation research, which is also a case study. I studied a single group. For instance, Ken Price study of single West Indian community in Bristol so as to understand life in a particular community. There were studies of a single group of people. That is why we refer to them as case studies. How do sociologists collect data for a case study? As the case study is an in-depth study of a single case, the researcher uses a combination of methods such as observation, interviews, or even questionnaire to get a better understanding of the group under study. For instance, if the sociologist is studying one school, a sociologist can use a combination of observations, interviews. The sociologist can also make use of a quantitative methods like questionnaire, for instance. In fact, using observation and interviews could suggest a hypothesis, that is, an idea which can be tested on a larger group through a quantitative method. Advantage of case study. A case study allows a study of a group or phenomena in great depth, which would help to attain higher validity, that is, obtain a true picture of what is going on out there. It allows the sociologist to understand the reason behind a behavior through closer, in-depth study with a combination of methods. This is not possible with a quantitative method like questionnaire, which is a one-off study. Let's now look at the limitations of case study. Case study is sometimes criticized for studying a small sample which is not representative, so that sociologists cannot apply the finding from a single case study to a larger group. Case studies is also said to lack reliability. As it depends on the researcher and his methods, it cannot be replicated. Critics, often the positivists, would argue that the findings of case studies cannot be easily verified. Thus, those who prefer case study would argue that it has high validity, that is, it allows in-depth study. But they may be criticized for lacking reliability, that is, it cannot be easily replicated. You must have realized that case study is often favored by interpretive sociologists and criticized by positivists. For instance, the critics about the inability to generalize of the use of restricted sample often comes from positivists. Let us now look at another method of research, longitudinal study. Longitudinal comes from the word long. A longitudinal study is therefore one that extends over a long period of time. Longitudinal studies are used to study long-term trends. The same people or group are used each time it uses a panel sample. Here is an example of a longitudinal study. J.W.B. Douglas studied the relationship between social class and educational achievement by looking at children born in 1969 and followed them up until they completed compulsory schooling, that is, till age 16. He found that one of the factors leading to children to proceed to study beyond the age 16 was parental interest. Douglas also established a relationship between social class and education and showed how social class made a difference to children's achievement. He also drew attention to the importance of the home and parental support in the education of the child. Another example of a long-term longitudinal study is one which was carried out in Mauritius itself that may come as a surprise to a few. It looked at how behavior in early years could be a predictor to adult behavior and therefore the need for reduction of risk elements from a young age. It was funded by the World Health Organization. The Mauritius Child Health Project was a prospective longitudinal study of child health and development based on a 1969 birth cohort, that is, a group born in 1969 of 1,795 children. It was probably one of the longest study. It was intervention at age 8, 11, 17, 23, 28, 35, and even at 40 years of age in 2010, with 763 persons still in the study, which was reported by Ryan in 2010. Let's now look at the advantages of longitudinal studies. Longitudinal studies help to uncover relationships that is not possible through one-off questionnaire or interview. For instance, it would not be possible to understand why some people grew up to get personality disorders unless it was possible to study the upbringing from a young age. Longitudinal studies helps to understand factors that bring changes over time, which is not possible with a one-off study. It also ensures higher validity as a researcher can get deeper understanding over time. Let us now look at some limitations of longitudinal study. Like all methods, longitudinal study has some limitations. For instance, longitudinal studies require long-term commitment on the part of the researcher and the researched. Such studies have the risk that the sample might shrink over time because it would be difficult to sustain interest over a long period of time. People may leave and not be traceable. Nevertheless, the sociologist embarking on such a study should take some precaution. For instance, the research requires a very large sample to ensure that a reasonable number stays up to the end. People may also not be willing to collaborate after some time. There's also a danger that people might get conditioned. They start behaving differently when under study, which is called in sociology the Hawthorne effect. Why the Hawthorne effect? Because it was first found in a company called Hawthorne Electric Company that people under study might get influenced by the very fact that they are being questioned or studied. In this lesson, we looked at case study, the uses of case studies and example of case study, the advantages and limitations of case studies. We also looked at longitudinal study, the uses and examples of longitudinal studies, the advantages and limitations of longitudinal studies. Let us now look at some of the questions you might get on case studies and longitudinal studies. What is a case study? 2 marks. What is a longitudinal study? 2 marks. What is a panel sample? 2 marks. Give an example of a case study. 2 marks. Give an example of a longitudinal study and explain why it is a longitudinal study. 6 marks. Give 2 advantages and 2 limitations of the case study. 8 marks. Explain the limitations of longitudinal studies. 8 marks. Explain why it is difficult to carry out a longitudinal study. 8 marks. And why does longitudinal study has higher validity but lacks reliability? 10 marks. We have now reached the end of this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. Just to remind you that the pictures and the graphics used in this presentation were from open source upslash.com, freemages.com and foster.com. We'll see you very soon for another lesson, and for today it's goodbye.